23 years ago, on August the 1st, 1989, in countryside that is perhaps some of the most rugged in the world, some of the most inhospitable in the world, yet also some of the most beautiful in the world. In that terrain, my brother, some friends, and myself took 2 hours to cover distance that the day before had taken us 5 hours to cover. It took 2 hours for us to cover in this grueling terrain what had taken us 5 hours the day before. That's what fear can make a person do. On July the 31st of that same year, we were on a hunting trip. My brother, my friends, and I, and these were friends from the Yali tribe that I grew up among. And we went to this area quite far off from where our village was, and it required working our way through this stunning rainforest and deep valleys and climbing a steep mountainside to this eagle's eyrie of a campsite in what was reputed to be the prime hunting grounds of our area. We got there, we made camp, and then early the next morning we got up and we went out into the forest ready to hunt. Only there was complete silence, an unnatural silence, as it was if somebody had taken a blanket and smothered the landscape so that no sound could escape. Not a creature was moving. And there was nothing that we could do. This was completely unnatural, so we broke camp. And we took a slightly different route to go home, and we worked our way along this very steep mountainside, nearly precipitous, but covered in trees. And at one point, there was a large log that bridged a gully that gashed the side of this mountainside. And some of us had gone ahead of it, others were behind me. I was crossing this log when suddenly something made me stop. Something wasn't right. And suddenly from deep in the ground below me came a distant roar, a distant rumbling, and it came increasingly fast up towards my feet from below. And instinctively I crouched down on this log and I grabbed the foliage of the mountainside beside me and I waited for seconds as this subterranean freight train heaved its way upwards towards us. And in seconds it hit. And the ground heaved and the trees, 100-foot tall trees, shook as if they were matchsticks. Eventually, all hell was breaking loose. Mountainside was breaking loose. Rocks were crashing down. Whole sections of the slope were crashing down and roaring their way down into the valley. And we were in the midst of this maelstrom of chaos, and we were terrified. We were absolutely terrified. Some of us don't think of ourselves as leaders, but we're all leaders in one way or another. I define a leader as somebody who looks at their environment, looks at the condition of things around them, and says, it shouldn't be that way, and then does something about it. That's the beginning of leadership. One of the myths in the world that I move in, which is the world of management consulting and working with business executives, is that the accomplished leader, the successful leader, is somebody with tremendous aplomb who's impervious to just about anything that could be thrown at them. Well, you're leaders in your own right and in your own way, and you'll know that that's a lie. That's not true. Every leader comes up against something in their pursuit of what's great, in their pursuit of what actually matters, that shakes the ground completely from beneath their feet. It might be the opposition that comes against us. It might be that powerful stakeholder in our community, in our business, in our world that we're moving in. But something comes up against us, and it comes up against us so powerfully that it shakes us. We didn't see it coming, and it makes us afraid, even afraid for our well-being. Where does a leader go when he or she is afraid? Well, most of us know that our instinctive reaction is to fight or to flee. Well, when the ground has been shaken from underneath your feet, what is fighting going to accomplish there? What's it going to do for you? And if you flee, where are you going to flee to? I'd like to suggest there's 3 things that we can turn to as leaders. The SAS Handbook of Survival says that the earthquake is one of the most frightening things a human being can experience, because there is nothing that can be done about it. But it does give a couple of tips. Facts are important to leaders. When we're in a place of fear and we're losing objectivity, we need facts. And the SAS Handbook says that when you're in an earthquake, don't go uphill. Don't go downhill. Don't go downhill to where things can fall on top of you. It also says, don't run. There's no point. My brother and my friends and I, we gathered together and we talked about what to do, terrified. And we immediately decided, not knowing the advice of the SAS Handbook, to run fast downhill. It was the way home, I have to say. And we were afraid of putting ourselves further out of help's reach and further into the wilderness. So we ran down and we ran for our lives. And we crossed fissures and we waded through mud and we crossed over fallen rocks and trees. And eventually we found ourselves on safe ground, and at that point we collapsed in exhaustion. And we covered in 2 hours what had taken us 5 the day before. Facts can only get you so far. As Helen told us earlier, ultimately it's just information. You have to do something with it. And the second thing that I think is much more fundamental in our response to fear is foundations. When I went to bed that night in a shaking house that was still shaking in aftershocks, I was 19, and the question I asked myself was, if I died today, what did I leave? What had I actually done in my short years that actually mattered? And if a leader hasn't worked out for him or herself what actually matters and why, they cannot last in the game. They have nothing to sustain them when the ground is shaken from beneath their feet if they do not know what matters and why, far beyond the facts. It is also not just the fuel for sustainability, it is the bedrock of stability for the leader. That's foundations. But there's a third thing, a very precious thing. 8 years later, I was back in New Guinea, and some friends and I, Yali friends, we decided that we were going to go on a mission. We were going to do motivational speaking. Bob, talking about how bad that is. Well, we were going to do a good job of motivational speaking, not quite the style that we do it here, but village to village. And we were on this mission, and I developed a terrible knee as we were hiking along in this this torturous terrain. And at one point on the second day, when my thoughts were preoccupied primarily with poor me, and not with the mission, we came to a place in this deep, deep ravine, literally about 2,000 foot deep ravine, and there's a cliff in front of me that I had to cross. And I don't like heights, but I learned to deal with them in that country. And there are these toe holds to get me across. And I'm looking at this, and I start to work my way out with my game knee, and I'm about halfway across, and I don't know how to move forward. I have no idea what to do to get myself to where the trail starts to widen out, just 5 feet away. And I was frightened. I looked down, and literally 1,000 feet below me is a roaring river. A friend of mine, his name is Hohobo, and I don't invite you to learn that. He says, Jonathan, just wait. These folk are like mountain goats, and he swiftly makes his way across, and he gets onto that flatter area, and he says, reach out your arm. And I reached it out, and he gripped it, and he hauled me across onto that wider spot. And as I'm tottering into balance in front of him, he looked at me with this very casual and easy smile, and he said, don't worry, Jonathan. If you had fallen, I'd have made sure I'd have gone with you. Facts are very important. They strip away the subjectivity that so often captures us when we're afraid. Foundations keep us stable. But there's nothing as precious, is there, when you're afraid in the moment. You haven't even recovered what foundations it is that you believe in, and there's a friend there to reach their hand out. Thank you.